Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
Okay, we're
Hello there, this is Jim Hogue with Emily Payton, and we are interviewing Andy Steele, who is the operations manager for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth. And he has a podcast. And I will allow him to tell you whatever he would like to tell you about his background. And we are looking forward to an interview that resembles perhaps the interviews I did 20 years ago when I was interviewing Jim Thompson and the people who first began to write about 9/11, and interviewed your colleague, Richard Gage, a few times. And we have always been able to bring to the people information that would not come anywhere else. So I'm hoping that in your introduction about yourself, you will tell us the title of your book, which is Born 9/11. And you can tell us a little bit about the progress that architects and engineers have made lately. And if you want to go back further than that, you're welcome to do that. So thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll turn it over to Andy Steele, and we'll hear all about it. Go for it.
All right. Well, thank you guys for having me on. First, I want to say what you guys are doing right now is so important, not just for bringing attention onto the September 11th issue, which we've been beating the drum on for a number of years here at AE 9/11 Truth, but also just for American democracy and the republic that we live in. I mean, you cannot have a functioning free country without open discussion, dialogue, and everybody participating in the process. And as we have learned over and over again in our work, the mainstream media is not doing the job that they should be doing. So that's why we need people like you out there bringing this information out to your audience as much as you can, and as much information as you can get to them. So thank you so much for doing that. And my name is Andy Steele, and I'm the operations manager at AE 9/11 Truth, which has already been told to you. And I've been involved with this organization for a very long time. It's actually hard to know when I first started, because I started out just as a volunteer. And even before that, I was a 9/11 activist. Probably since 2007 or so, I've been out there writing articles about this issue, getting involved in various projects. I joined on with the volunteer team here at AE back in 2010. And then I got hired on full time here on the staff in my current role back in 2015. So we were involved in many projects, including getting our CEO onto C-SPAN's Washington Journal with a huge phone-in campaign. So many things, pushing the Bobby Mcelveen Act, that's draft legislation for a new investigation, which I can talk about a little bit more. But the whole point of AE 9/11 Truth, as your audience may or may not be aware, is to bring and shed a light onto this evidence that has been ignored by our media, by our government for so many years. Now, at this point in the game, we can't say that it's been ignored, because we've done so much work engaging them, confronting them on this evidence. So they are aware of it, and they can't debunk it. They try to, they fail miserably, but they are aware of it. And now they're at the point where they're just relying on obfuscation and outright lies to avoid dealing with the evidence that the three towers were brought down in controlled demolitions on September 11th. That is the thesis here at AE 9/11 Truth. That is what we stand for. We don't focus on any other areas of September 11th except for the hard science. That way we don't get accused of having any kind of political agendas, any kind of personal agendas. You can't argue with science. They still are in place, even during a big disaster, even during events. They have political agendas attached to them afterwards. So what is this evidence? Well, let's look at the three high rises that fell on September 11th. And when I say three, most people think that I've made a mistake, that it should only be two. because most people are familiar with the Twin Towers that fell on those days, the two buildings that had airplanes crash into them. But there was actually a third tower that fell in the later in the day at 5:20 in the evening. This is World Trade Center Building 7. Now, it's easy to lose sight of this building because it was dwarfed by the Twin Towers that people are more familiar with. However, this would have been the biggest building in something like 30 of our states. All right, so this was a big building, 47 stories, steel framed high rise. And it housed many important government offices such as the SEC, the FBI. I believe the CIA may even had an office there. It was also considered the emergency management bunker, for FEMA, their emergency bunker for any kind of disaster that should take place there in New York. And at 5:20 in the evening, after it sustained some minor fires as a result of the fall of the North Tower on that day, some very minor damage on the corner of the building just suddenly drops like a rock, straight down, symmetrical, and actually in free fall for 8 stories as it goes down, as it was later revealed through the work of some of our supporters. So when you watch this building fall, and I don't have a visual aid to show you, so I'm going to have to ask the audience that after you're done watching this, or maybe you want to pause the video right now, go to YouTube, try to find a video of this building coming down with no commentary, even from us. Just watch it for the 7 seconds it goes down, straight down again, symmetrical. So when you watch it fall, it looks just like a controlled demolition. Intuitively, you say, this does not look right. So from that point, we start looking at some of the specifics. When you dive into the explanation that NIST gave us for why this building came down, and there's been a lot of people interested, and it took them a long time. Finally, in 2008, they gave us this new phenomenon that brings buildings down. It's called thermal expansion. Now, I don't know if thermal expansion itself is new, but the idea that it could bring down a steel frame high rise just from random fires for the first time in history is a brand new phenomenon. And so what they claim happened to create what we saw, and I'll try to take some of the jargon out of it, but they claim that in the corner of the building, the opposite corner from where there was any damage, that there were some raging fires, and that these steel beams were framing into a girder, and that the beams expanded because of the intense heat. And they pushed the girder off of its seat, and it crashed onto the floor below. And this initiated an entire chain reaction within the building, so that the interior falls first, followed by the exterior. And that is why it looks like a controlled demolition, although they tell you that it's not. They tell you that the reason that it looks like this is because, again, the inside fell and then the outside fell, all because of this process that was going on inside. But when you step back, there's some problems with the story right away. First of all, this has never happened inside a steel frame high rise before. I mean, think about it. For years, decades, we've had steel frame buildings and fires broke out in them. And there's plenty of examples. You can see them out in China, other countries, very sturdy buildings. They catch fire. They light up like a torch in the night. Pieces of it might fall away here and there. But in the end, you always have a steel frame skeleton standing. And a lot of times they're able to renovate it and have it open again for business and bring new office and companies in there to occupy them. All right. So it never happened before. Suddenly it happens on September 11th, coincidentally, the same day that the Twin Towers fall down. But when you look at NIST's explanation and you look at actually some of the evidence that they have, first of all, their whole explanation, again, thermal expansion, you need raging fires, right? But we have photographs from the day of September 11th, an hour before this building came down, that show the fires were out in the area where they say the collapse initiated. So where they say these beams got hot, pushed the girder off of its seat, started the whole chain reaction, the fires were already out on that day. So there's the first problem with NIST's explanation that they will not address. But also, too, when you dive into what they say and some of their measurements and things, they get things wrong. Now, I'm actually going to cite a chapter, or not a chapter, but a page right from my book, because this is highlighted here. But let's see, they omitted the presence of the stiffener plates and the shear studs in their analysis, which would have countered the thermal expansion and prevented the girder walk-off. And then they also wrongly assumed that the exterior frame of the building was infinitely rigid, so that the expansion of beams on the 13th floor had to move inward, when in fact the exterior walls were quite flexible and any expansion in the floor would have actually pushed the exterior frame outwards. There is a whole long list of these things, of measurements they got wrong, factors they didn't include, parts of the building that they did not include. They left out the presence of the stiffener plates, the shear studs. All of these things would have countered this thermal expansion. Our engineers have pointed it out to NIST, and they refuse to acknowledge it. They just say that they stand by their report. And just for clarity's sake, let me say that NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. That is an agency under the Department of Commerce that issued these reports. They were tasked with finding out why these 3 high rises came down. Now, when NIST first issued its report, they were challenged publicly and embarrassed because one of our scientists had run the Building 7 through some physics engineering software and discovered that for 8 stories of this building's fall, this building was falling at free fall acceleration. That means it was meeting no resistance for those 8 stories. How is that possible? It falls into the path of greatest resistance, but it's meeting no resistance. So there's a contradiction there. NIST only acknowledged this in a revised draft of the report, and they broke up World Trade Center 7's collapse into 3 stages of collapse initiation, but they did not acknowledge the significance of the free fall, which is huge. So right there, we have problems with the official story, which is the physics. We have the lack of raging fires. We have the fact that the final report did not take into account all of the facts that were there on the ground. They basically dry labbed their entire report. That means they're basically cheating, taking out pieces to try to make their analysis happen. And when you actually look at the models of World Trade Center 7 coming down on that day, and you compare it to what happened in real life, it looks like nothing like what really happened. In the NIST models that they release, the building begins to crumple on itself like a soda can. It begins to twist and turn, and then they stop it. In real life, the building came straight down. Now, it's interesting because NIST defends them stopping their computer animation by saying that they only wanted to go up to the point of collapse initiation instead of just modeling the building's entire fall. Well, yeah, but that's when the interesting stuff happens. That's when it begins to not look like what happened in real life. So why not just model the entire collapse? Of course, they won't do that. When 9/11 Truth activists ask for the input data on their computer models, NIST says that we can't. They cite a law that was passed in 2002 that says that the government can withhold information if they feel that it would jeopardize public safety. And they say, yes, if we release the models on this building that no longer exists, then it would jeopardize the safety of the public. Of course, that is a very flimsy excuse. They just don't want to have their data checked. So for the longest time, the 9/11 Truth movement was left with just looking at the videos of the building, but not having a computer model to go by, to research and analyze. That was until AE 9/11 Truth spearheaded a fundraising campaign for the University of Alaska Fairbanks, led by Dr. Leroy Halsey, a very prestigious engineering professor down there, and he modeled World Trade Center 7's fall. And what UAF found was that NIST's story was completely impossible for them to mimic what happened in real life. NIST could, what NIST claims happened inside this building could not have happened. However, not only did they disprove the NIST model, but they were actually able to replicate what happened in real life by removing the interior columns and then the exterior columns pretty much simultaneously or within a few seconds of each other. And there you go. The building comes straight down, symmetric, and but UAF doesn't get into this any further. But when you step back and think about it, how do you remove all of those columns virtually at the same time? You can't do that with random fire. Random fires are a chaotic, organic process, and don't affect the building all in the same areas in the exact same way. So the only way you can do that is with controlled demolition, which is exactly what happened on that day. So a lot of people don't know about World Trade Center 7, but a lot have called it the smoking gun because it is so important and it is such an obvious, blatant flaw in the official story that most people just watching it fall know exactly what happened that day or what didn't happen. Now, I want to just open up for any questions if you guys have them for me.
Well, you mentioned that maybe we could find a clip of it. Would you like me to look for that, or I'll leave it up to you?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I'll pause us and go look
We-
for that so we can share it.
We can do that. And in the meantime, people listening to this, it's recorded. They can stop the recording anytime they want and go to see several different versions of the demolition of Building 7, even the one that the Brits, where the Brits reported that it had collapsed before it had collapsed.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, that is a very good point to bring up, and that's something I forgot to mention. So this is a unprecedented event, not something that never happened before, but somehow the BBC was able to tell everybody ahead of time, 20 minutes before, that World Trade Center 7 had already collapsed. This is 20 minutes before it did. The lady, Jane Stanley, is standing there with the building still standing behind her, saying the Salomon Brothers building has collapsed. That was the other name for World Trade Center 7. And then actually, before it actually did collapse, they lose the feed suddenly. And, I speculate it might have been kind of embarrassing for the building to actually come down after she had already reported it. That would have been bad form. CNN also reported it early as well.
Nothing seems to embarrass them. And I don't know whether you heard my interviews with Richard Gage or not, but or whether you've saw them afterwards. But what he and I were talking about, and I will quote him, he said, they make shit up. When they want to prove their point, they just make stuff up. And if you tell enough lies in the process, you can come up with any conclusion you want. If you say that the building did this when it didn't, then you can follow up on that lie and tell people whatever you want to tell them. And I have met individuals who have seen the demolition of Building 7 and tied themselves in knots to explain to me how that could have happened through damage, through some external damage, through fire that went, here's the good one that they made up, that the fire went under the city of New York for an entire block. I don't know if anybody listening has been to New York, but an entire city block, not a street block, but an avenue block is mighty long. And this fire went underground, ignited a fuel tank toward the middle of Building 7, and that caused the building to fall down. Now, that was a blatant lie that people believed, and other people said, oh, well, it was like a volcano. It's exactly the way a volcano works. So people were able to ignore the facts that A&E, that architects and engineers have studiously brought out right at the beginning and then over the years, and come up with their own crazy ideas about how that thing collapsed because they believed the lies that they were told by NIST. So that's along the way. And then there's Kevin Ryan. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about what he came up with. And again, I would say it's not that NIST got it wrong. NIST blatantly lied, because anybody spending a little time watching this can tell that it's not a mistake at all. It's a blatant lie.
Well, and I'll tell you, I was at an AIA convention years ago. We were doing an outreach there, trying to get a resolution passed. I got talking to an architect who was skeptical of what I was saying, but I'm being nice and saying skeptical. He just didn't want to hear it. And he actually speculated that there was an earthquake that happened on the day of 9/11, and that was why World Trade Center 7 came down. I said, an earthquake? That's some pretty bad luck. What data do you have to prove that? Of course he had done, but people will jump through so many. I mean, there was the fact checker for the supposed Popular Mechanics book that supposedly debunks us. They get a lot wrong. Who was embarrassed on a radio show before just outright lying, claiming that he saw pictures of building 7 scooped out. Turned out later, NIST had to acknowledge that that was not the case. It wasn't scooped out. There was some very minor damage on the corner of World Trade Center 7. On the opposite corner from where they say the collapse initiated, they even acknowledged that that minor damage had nothing to do with bringing about the building's collapse. So he was embarrassed by that. And I mean, over the years, we've heard it all. And it's just people jumping through hoops, trying to do anything they can to avoid dealing with the hard facts on this matter. Because obviously, as we know, even though we don't get into complicity, who did it, why they did it, obviously it has huge implications for the whole 9/11 story and the last 20 years that we've been enduring since this event took place. So, well, we got to keep on pushing on this.
May I jump in here and say that because they didn't follow normal protocol afterwards and save any of the evidence, we have reason to conclude that they weren't really interested in finding out everything that was going on. And when we're talking about how people have allowed themselves to believe a fabricated story, it's no different than the mass formation psychosis that we're seeing with COVID. And I would like you to also talk about, if you can, I don't know where the boundary between politicizing it gets, but my understanding is that there were people who had given access to the elevator shafts in all the buildings prior to the event. Do you get into that and what they might have been doing, or the positioning of thermite or any other sort of explosives that would have caused these demolitions?
Yeah, I'm aware of the 8-month elevator renovation that took place with Ace Elevator. In the prior to September 11th, we certainly note it. Hard to know what went on during that without being able to talk to people. That's why, we focus on the physics and everything that you can actually point to in the videos that the other side has a hard time arguing with, because it's impossible to know that. Yeah, we certainly do note that, and somehow somebody got explosives into these buildings. Might have been easier back in that time because the public was less guarded, less vigilant. Of course, the world of 2022 is much different than the world of 2001. But yeah, we are aware of that. We have looked into that, but there's only so much information you can gain on that when it's not captured on video like the fall of the towers was. I mean, for instance, in the case of the Twin Towers, and even though Building 7 is the smoking gun, because it's just so obvious, the Twin Towers is where people actually died on that morning. And when they actually, let's just even back up here. So within a few days of this horrible event, Twin Towers coming down, killing all of these people, there was a professor out of Northwestern University named Zdeněk Bazant, and he already had an explanation for everybody. And this explanation was that the top block of these towers, so let's imagine like each twin tower broken up into 3 pieces. You have the top block above the airplane impact, you have the airplane impact zone, and then you got all these floors down below. So in this top block, that when the buildings, when it came down, it crushed the lower floors all the way to the bottom, while somehow committing suicide, because we never see a top block sitting on all of the rubble at ground zero. Now, there's some problems with this story, and this was documented in a paper by Tony Zambotti and Graham McQueen. It's called The Missing Joel. Is that as you watch this top block hit the lower portion, it doesn't slow down. It doesn't decelerate. It actually accelerates and into the path of greatest resistance. So think about this. Even if you have a hammer hitting a nail, right? Even if it drives that nail through the board, the hammer will still slow down as it hits the nail. The only explanation for this is that all of the core columns and everything in the lower structure was being removed simultaneously. And this is what the evidence shows. In fact, the top blocks of these buildings disappear within the first 4 or so seconds as they're coming down. So it can't be, there's nothing to do the work of driving the building all the way down to the bottom. In fact, on the South Tower, the top block begins to tip over to the side. Now, and then it changes its direction. Like, so there's action going on with the core structure in order to make it change its momentum, because it should have fallen off to the plaza below. But instead it falls back into the building, and then we never see it again. This could not have happened. And, it can't crush all the way down to the bottom. Interestingly enough, I've seen Hollywood movies get this concept right, while NIST gets it wrong. There was a movie I saw where an airplane clips the top of the Washington Monument, and even though it's a different kind of construction, the physical characteristics of this are the same, and it crushes down a little bit, which is what should have happened, and then either falls off to the side, breaks, disappears, but this should not have happened. And just like we were talking about World Trade Center 7's computer models only going up to the point of collapse initiation, so does NIST Twin Tower models. And then they say, oh, the rest is just what you would expect to happen. Now that is a cop-out. That is that is a group not wanting to address the physical impossibility of this entire story. And see, even the dog agrees with me. So when you think about it, the Twin Towers and their computer model, they say, oh, what happened after collapse initiation doesn't matter. Well, that's where all of the people died on that day. They died as a result of what happened after that initiation of collapse. So NIST should surely address it. When we watch the Twin Towers come down, you can see visible squibs, puffs of dust, of building materials shooting out far below the collapse line, right? So the building's collapsing up here, and you see little explosions going off way down here. So there is a problem with this entire official story that has been documented by AE 9/11 Truth for many years. This is a fact that I just became aware of not long ago. I love harping on this one because it's just so obvious. So on one of the towers, the airplane only, they claim that the collapse initiated on a certain floor, but only the tip of the airplane touched that floor. So there was only a little bit of damage. So there wouldn't have been the raging fires and damage needed for that collapse to initiate on that floor. So there is another problem with NIST's official story, because it doesn't even match common sense. It doesn't match really what happened, ignores observable facts, and at the very least justifies an entirely new investigation. So, that's always the first thing, is the impossible physics of these towers collapses is the first reason why you should question 9/11.
While you're on the impossible physics, there is a law in physics that anybody in high school knows, which is that if you have asymmetrical damage, you cannot have symmetrical collapse. And so that's the big elephant in the room for NIST. They completely ignored that fact. And you just highlighted it by saying that a plane didn't even go in that far, and yet we have symmetrical collapse. An airplane, I'm not admitting that anything about the airplanes right now. I'm just saying that if you believe that an airplane did what they said it did, you could not possibly have symmetrical. You could not possibly have symmetrical collapse. The collapse would have been asymmetrical, and the damage would have been asymmetrical. So anyway.
Yeah, and another thing too is they pretend like these towers had no core columns around them. Actually, I can find footage from the day of September 11th where they're just claiming that these are just some slabs hanging onto the walls, and that's how these mighty towers stood for so many decades in New York City with so many people in them without running into any problems. Of course, that's not true. There were core columns, and there was an animation put out by Nova before NIST gave us the official story. Nova tried to take this on. And they made a beautiful computer animation of showing because they were claiming it was a pancake collapse, that the floors just pancaked on each other at that point. And they show in their animation, they show the pancaking floors on top of each other. The problem with this animation, it's beautiful, but it's not accurate, because when the floors are hitting each other, the core columns are still remaining standing like records falling on a spindle. And we all know, anybody who has just observed anything about 9/11 on that day, we all know that we did not see a big standing tower of core columns remaining in the aftermath of September 11th. Those were gone too. So they had to go with this whole pile driver nonsense. And we already pointed out the problems there. What they do when they talk about this, they rely on people not delving into this deeply. Your average person just putting on the TV, getting an explanation and being satisfied with it. And they wrap it with a lot of verbiage, jargon, and all of this stuff. And they, put out these thick volumes of for everybody. And they know most people aren't going to read them, yet they'll be satisfied with them. But when you actually delve into their logicness, I mean, there's an FAQ on their Building 7 report, getting back to them saying the interior of the building fell first and then the exterior. You don't see any signs of that on the outside. Now, first of all, I don't think that's even possible. You can't have the inside of a building fall and then leave the outside still remaining like some kind of Wile E. Coyote cartoon. He doesn't fall off the cliff until he realizes it. And even if that were the case, you would see massive warpage going on the outside. This does not happen in any of the videos, but they put it out there and they just assume people are going to buy it until they run into people like those at AE 9/11 Truth. And that's what they've been relying on for a long time. I mean, so you get into the physics of the buildings. You also have the extreme temperatures. They've made a joke out of this phrase over the years, but that doesn't stop it from being true. Jet fuel does not melt steel. It doesn't get hot enough to do that. But we have molten steel, molten iron being found at the site on that day. I mean, FEMA, they did an initial report of the site and they documented steel with a high corrosion attack, Swiss cheese in appearance. All right, so the steel was evaporated. That takes 4,000 degree temperatures that jet fuel cannot account for. Where did this come from? I mean, we have workers from the cleanup of September 11th and the weeks that followed, reporting their boots melting on the pile, picking up debris and seeing a little river of steel flowing there. I mean, we have satellite images that show fires burning for weeks after the attacks. And so what can account for this? Where are these high temperatures coming from? And then we get into the third part of why people should investigate September 11th, which is what was found in the dust. So there was an independent team of scientists led by Niels Harrit out of Copenhagen, Denmark, where they analyzed the dust, and what they found were these little iron microspheres. And they weren't the only ones that found them. Actually, a lot of other, quote, official reports. What'd you say?
Stephen Jones found them.
Right, he had found them too, right? And there was a lot of other studies that found them. They were so prevalent in the dust that official studies use these iron microspheres to distinguish World Trade Center dust from what's called background dust, which is dust that has nothing to do with the World Trade Center disaster. That's how prevalent they were. They were used to identify World Trade Center dust. And this is not in question by even the official stories or the official sources that these iron microspheres were here. So when Stephen Jones investigated it and his entire team, they found these red-gray chips in there, and they did ignition tests on them. And what they found was that the red-gray chips would have a thermitic reaction. They would form these little iron microspheres when ignited. Now, the other side wants to say, oh, that's just primer paint. There's nothing to it. Right. But when you actually do a side-by-side comparison, as somebody did on a YouTube video, a scientist, of primer paint when it's ignited and these red-gray chips, a completely different reaction. The primer paint turns black, wilts, as you would expect it to. These actually ignite and, again, form these little iron microspheres, which were found so much, all throughout the World Trade Center dust. So, and they have the same chemical properties as thermite. Now, this is a special, very, very special form of thermite. This is what they dubbed as nanothermite, more concentrated, more able to, to ignite and do the work that it needed to do. And as some people may or may not know, there are structural steel cutter charges that have been patented, which utilize thermite through a narrow channel to cut steel in the way that would have needed to have been done on September 11th. And in fact, when you actually watch videos of the South Tower, you can see molten metal coming out of the building. It's bright orange. Now NIST wants to say, oh, that is molten aluminum from the airplane. Don't look here. Don't bother with that. However, molten aluminum in daylight conditions, and we all remember that September 11th was a bright blue morning. That is silver. This was bright orange, red hot. So we have so much evidence of this. Now, the basic thing to do, if NIST or any debunkers out there want to challenge us, is to say, hey, let's do our own tests on the dust. Why doesn't NIST, I would imagine that they have some World Trade Center dust. It's such an important event. Conduct the same test that Niels Harret's team did on your own dust samples, but they refuse to. And what's their excuse? Well, we don't expect to find anything. All right. So we don't expect to find anything. We're not going to do the test, but how do you find something unless you do the tests? See, it's circular logic, and it's something basically they just don't want to handle it. They don't want to look into this. And we've done many things. We've visited congressmen's offices trying to compel them to pressure NIST to do these same tests on the dust. Of course, Congress, being what it is, doesn't comply, doesn't want to get involved with it. So we've got to continue doing our actions and putting pressure and raising these points. So for me, the case was made 10 or so years ago that these buildings were brought down in controlled demolitions. But for you out there in the audience, if you don't want to go that far, then I say support simply rerunning the analysis. Considering that we lost nearly 3,000 people in this event, and not just them, but all those people who got sick in the aftermath of September 11th as a result of the buildings coming down. It was not as the reason they're sick is because they breathed in the dust there in Manhattan. So it's not because airplanes hit the towers, it's because the buildings pulverized and came crashing down that day. So they're suffering as a result of it too. So because so many people are suffering as a result of this, shouldn't we have a better understanding of what really happened on that day? So you should support a new investigation too, if for no other reason to satisfy people like me who keep raising these questions and all of this controversy. And you can join our call for a new investigation by going to ae911truth.org, sign your name to that petition, and all it is calling for this rerunning of the analysis, which I think is a long overdue.
Andy, would you please describe why this has become a passion for you, and bring to the point the importance of being able to trust our governments and trust the work that they're doing? Would you describe why it's this particular event for you has motivated you to spend so much time and effort?
Well, I think about the fact that people died on that day, obviously. And those people didn't do anything other than go to work that morning. People who were waiters and waitresses at the Windows on the World restaurant, not involved in any political intrigue, yet got caught in the middle of everything that went down. And I put myself in their shoes. I have a fear of heights. I don't like to step near any edges. I get vertigo and all of that. And I think about those poor people who were trapped with fires raging underneath them. They couldn't get out, and they had to make a choice of whether they were going to burn up or jump out the window and die that way. That was the only choice they had left, one of two options. That is a terrible position to be in. Now, they died on that day, but they have families and friends and loved ones who still remember this event. And I guarantee it pops into their minds at least once a week since this event took place. People like Bob Mcelveen, who lost his son Bobby on that day. Something I didn't even get into in discussing this are all the reports of explosions on September 11th. 118 first responders documented explosions going off on that day. The coroner who oversaw Bobby's autopsy the day of September 11th said that Bobby was killed by an explosion there in the lobby as he was entering into the building. So where is the justice for Bobby? on that day? Where is the justice for people who did nothing other than go to work? Now, we have the Bobby McElveen World Trade Center Investigation Act. This is draft legislation that would do exactly what we've been calling for. We've been lobbying Congress for this for years. It's still out there, can still be passed. And it's named after Bobby to remind us as to why this is so important. So for me personally, this is a step too far, what happened on that day to all of these innocent people. And then just the after effects of September 11th and the world that we live in. I don't know how more people can't step forward and get involved and get passionate about this.
Well, I can tell you part of my conversation with Richard Gage was who are the culprits? And of course, it's wisely against your protocols to discuss who. But some of the who actually proudly took pictures of themselves and showed themselves in front of the shape charges, as I recall, and were regarded as pretty cool dudes when they got back home to Israel. And so there are only two entities on the face of the earth that could possibly have done this when you realize what was done. And one was the CIA and the other was Mossad. And the CIA didn't take pictures of themselves at work, but Mossad did. So that has to be utterly, completely ignored. And I understand why it has to be ignored by you, because all hell would break loose if you actually got into who done it. So you don't have to, I understand why you might not want to comment on that, but I'd like to hear something from you about that.
Yeah, no, I'm going to be honest. It has been so hard to try to get people. I mean, when I say people, your average person will acknowledge this. And most times these days will say that we are right. They'll say, well, what can I personally do about it? And they'll go on with their lives, but they will say that we have a point. And why not have a new investigation? But for things to happen and for things to be solidified in the public consciousness, you got to get two entities on board. You got to get the government and the media. And in my view, they've been complicit in the cover up of this information over these years. And we can't even get them to acknowledge what happened on that day. I mean, we just took NIST to court, and we had we submitted a request for correction to them on their World Trade Center 7 report. They didn't respond favorably, and so we had to take them to court in this case. And of course, it was thrown out because the government wants to claim that we as citizens don't have any kind of standing in this. They also, what's come out in this, is that the government has no obligation to issue correct reports to the American public. Now think about this, like informationally correct reports. They could just draw like a little doggy on a piece of paper if they wanted to. Mm-hmm. And hand that to you as something. I mean, if you really want to take it far enough. So this is unprecedented, and this is alarming for people who care about truth and integrity and actually believe that America is a land of justice and truth, but they always tell us in school. So there's some major implications. What I like about what AE 9/11 Truth, what we do here, is that they really can't argue with it. I mean, they try to, they make fools of themselves, and all they have to rely on is this corporate media establishment, which kind of surrounds and protects the official story like a soft membrane. But we've chipped through that as well. And so at some point, yes, once it's acknowledged what brought these towers down, then there needs to be some action as to getting some questions answered about these other things. Who had access? Who had the motive, means, and opportunity? And that'll probably go into the hands of more skilled people than myself and others here, because we just focus on the science. But the first step is getting the what established.
There's your answer as to why they cannot acknowledge the science. Because once they acknowledge what happened, then obviously the next step is who done it. And they know they cannot possibly go there. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Florida Bulldog. It's a publication, newspaper. I think it might be just online, I'm not sure. And I interviewed him. He was investigating the activities of the supposed hijackers when they were studying flight training in Florida. And that was so upsetting to the powers that be that they even sent Edward Meese down with a crew to shut the guy up. And I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but I said to him, I said, once you get close to what actually happened in Florida, they will shut down your investigation and you will have nothing. And that's exactly what happened, because I have followed one angle, one aspect, one clue after another. You look at Cynthia McKinney, just asked a couple of questions. The Democrats ran her out of office. They are scared to death to be connected with anything that might point to the guilty party in 9/11. So I certainly admire your tenacity and your courage to stick with the actual physical events. And I certainly wish you the best. I've been working on it ever since it happened. And the frustration of the brain dead people who think that Osama bin Laden did it. You can't talk to people like, they're not, it's not normal that they have been so brainwashed that they actually still think that Osama bin Laden pulled off 9/11. But what you're doing might make some people with brains, at least, think that, gosh, I guess Osama bin Laden must have been, wow, he must have been God
Right.
to do that.
Well, may I jump in here, please? That was 9/11 was immediately clear to me that it was a controlled demolition. You can watch on the replays those little explosions coming down. But aside from that, it was also when I started to follow the money because of Silverstein, like you mentioned, Mossad. But Silverstein taking out all kinds of insurance on the building shortly before, and also the fact that there were these training exercises going on at the same time that confused our real Air Force and so forth, that were mimicking exactly what was really going on. So it has so much bearing with what is going on right now with the raid on Mar-a-Lago, and also the military industrial complex becoming the medical military industrial complex. And it began, a big part of it began with the Patriot Act, which was, in my understanding, written before this event. So some of the people, many of the people are alive still that were involved in this. And your work to bring out and to keep it front and center, and that this did not happen as the official narrative said, will allow us, since we're coming to this time where Americans are waking up to the absolute rife corruption and evil that's of corporatism that's in our government. We when we actually demand it, we can bring evidentiary proceedings forward to bring the truth forward in a way that holds the people accountable who were acting in such an immoral and such a deceitful and horrendously evil manner. I'd like you to hold up your book so that
Sure.
our viewers can see it.
Yeah, sure. So we're always looking for new ways to get the evidence out there. We've made documentary films. We have books that are more of just an explanation of the evidence, like manuals on that. So I had this idea, I have got some art skills here. Why don't we do a graphic novel? So that's it right there. Born
Okay.
on 9/11. It is the story of a 18-year-old kid who wakes up to this information. His father died in the North Tower of the World Trade Center. The same moment that he was being born. So that part is fictional. He goes on this crusade to expose the information. So even though it's a fictional story, it has all of the facts that we were talking about here, and probably even more that I forgot to mention, included in this book. It's a good story. It's got endorsements from a number of people. They're right here on the back of the book. You can get it at ae911truth.org. We're working on getting it on Amazon slowly. A lot of hard work trying to get stuff on Amazon, more than we anticipated. It's not that easy, but yeah, it should be there pretty soon. So yeah, you can buy it, and we've put this out. A lot of people interested in it. We've got, as I said, documentaries at our store too. We just released one last year called The Unspeakable. It's about the families on September 11th questioning this. We're going to be putting out a new documentary around the anniversary. I don't believe it has a title yet, or if it does, they haven't told me yet, but it's going to be focusing on the corporate media and their complicity in all of this. So look for that. And if you aren't signed up for our emails at AE911 Truth, that's how we tell you what we're doing and what we're up to and keep you involved in it. So go to our website and sign up. All you gotta do is put your email in there. I think you used to be able to get a free copy of Beyond Misinformation, a PDF of it when you did so. I don't know if we're offering that anymore, but if you write to me, I'll send you a free PDF of Beyond Misinformation. You can write to us in our contact box. But yes, sign up for our emails, because this is how you know what is going on. The New York Times is not going to report any of this to you. Fox News, MSNBC, all those places are not going to. They're not going to tell you all of the great things that we are doing, or the fact that the government is doing everything they can to hide from this evidence. But we will tell you all about it. And of course, there's my show too, which we feature every week, 9/11 Free Fall. It's a video podcast. It pretty much will look just like this, except there's a new person on there with me every single week. All of the engineers, architects, scholars, activists, the great people that make this movement what it is. So you can check that out at 911freefall.com. So we have so many things. Just begin by going to ae911truth.org and learn more about us.
And I want to let you know, I don't know whether you realize you're in very good company with about 9/11. I've read 4 of them. And I even wrote one called, not a book, but the Ballad of Ladder 5. But here's 11/9. It's a fictional book about, it's kind of a parody of the 9/11 story. Only, well, I won't go into it. I don't want to take up the time. But 11/9 is a good example of fiction. Victoria Alexander wrote Locus Aminus, which is
Yep.
About 9/11. Sibel Edmonds wrote The Lone Gladio, which is a real thriller. And Mark Estrin wrote a book, I think it was called Skulk. So it's out there, these fictional books about 9/11, which are based on truth. And I wanted to ask you, is your book, I know it's a graphic novel, which may be the first, I'm not sure about that, about 9/11. Did some of your information come from the families directly to help your main character move along?
Yeah, the main focus of the, quote, conspiracy part of it is all around the evidence that we've been talking about today, because it is an AE911 Truth publication. Interestingly enough, though, we have real life people show up and make cameos in this book. Among them is Bob Mcelveen, who I cited earlier. He lost his son Bobby on the day of September 11th. We have appearances by Tony Zambodi, one of the authors of the Missing Jolt paper, and Roland Engel, who's from our CEO now, and he's an engineer, and he makes an appearance as well. So, and I had all their blessings. They all got to look at it first and approve it. And the evidence that we cite is directly from here. Actually, I had a great bunch of editors. This is the book right here. Lots of nice pictures, but I had a great bunch of editors. Let me just get that page up here in front of me, even though I know who they are by heart. But we have them listed. It's actually a little bit later that I have that page, but oh, there they are. And great people there, Craig McKee, Kelly David, Susan Clay. They were making sure that my grammar stayed on track and all my punctuation was right. Ted Walter, I consulted with him about evidence points, and then we got a great cover designed by Jeff Long. I couldn't do anything without all of these people. It's my name on the front of the book, but these people were just as much a part of it too, and I couldn't have done this without them. So I want to give them their credit as well.
Well, maybe I can review it someday for Vermont Independent.
That would be perfect. More eyes on it, the better.
Okay. Well, Emily, do we have any more burning questions for Mr. Steele?
No, we have questions for our audience. Our audience really, it's upon us to really seek the truth and to demand the truth and to demand that our government doesn't skimp on the truth and holding people accountable. We have to do this for one another and our countrymen.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember speaking with Eric Hufschmidt a few times. I had him on my radio program. And within a few days of the event on 9/11, Eric Hufschmidt said, we have enough evidence now
Right.
to begin any kind of a normal. I mean, if the country functioned, there would be investigations left and right beginning now. And they have never, ever happened. And of course, the big book of fiction about the whole thing was the 9/11 Commission report.
Right.
They had to stack up a lot of lies and they had to leave out most of what happened in order to put that report out. But it sure looks slick. And David Ray Griffin did a wonderful job deconstructing it. So anyway, you know, it's a fight that I'm going to keep fighting.
Mhm.
Me too.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for
Thank you.
Thank you for your patriotism.
I'll put this up on BitChute after Emily sends it to me.
All right, great, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Bye-bye.
Let's